Genetics. Sexual reproduction. Most eukaryotes reproduce sexually, fusing two gametes, created by meiosis, to produce an offspring. The process of fusing gametes is called fertilization. Sexual reproduction increases the genetic variation of a population by creating genetically unique individuals. In this picture, we see the fusion of haploid gametes during fertilization, resulting in a diploid offspring. Genetic variation. If sexual reproduction creates genetically unique individuals, why do offspring still resemble their parents? In 1865, an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel provided part of the answer to this question when he announced that he worked out the rules of inheritance through a series of experiments on garden peas. Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel was a monk who lived in an Austrian monastery. He had attended the University of Vienna, where he studied the natural sciences, as well as physics and mathematics. The monastery where he lived and worked was devoted to scientific teaching and research. In fact, a lot of the monks would go teach at the local school. One important aspect of Mendel's work was the formation of an agricultural society, emphasizing the importance of research that would help breeding programs become more efficient. Mendel's experiments. Mendel's experiments with pea plants were aimed at addressing one of the most fundamental issues concerning heredity. What are the basic patterns of heredity? Genetics. Study of gene sequences and a component of heredity. Heredity is transmission of traits from parents to offspring. And a trait, an observable characteristic of an organism such as size, color, shape, etc. Heredity Hypotheses. At Mendel's time, there were two ideas to explain heredity. One, blending inheritance. Genetic material from the two parents blend together. For example, a red flower and a white flower cross produces a pink flower. 2. Inheritance of acquired characteristics. Traits present in the parents are modified through use and passed on to their offspring in the modified form. It was first introduced as a theory by French naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lamarre in 1809. For example, giraffes have a long neck because their ancestors kept stretching their necks out to reach the leaves in the trees, and the long neck trait was passed on. Heredity Hypotheses. Neither hypothesis was backed up with experimental data, but were supported by the scientific community. Mendel discovered the basic principles of heredity by breeding garden peas and carefully planned experiments where he chose an appropriate model organism. A model organism consists of individuals that are usually small, short-lived, inexpensive to take care of, produce many offspring in a relatively short period of time, and can be easily manipulated experimentally. Mendel's model organism, the pea plant. Mendel chose pea plants as his model organism. There are many varieties with distinct inherited traits, such as color, height, and shape. Controlled matings can be achieved with pea plants. Each pea plant has both reproductive organs, the pollen-producing organs, stamens, and ovule-producing organs, carpels. Cross-pollination, fertilization between different plants, can be achieved by dusting one plant with pollen from another. Controlled breeding of the pea plant. In order to precisely control his breedings, Mendel would cut the stamens off the plant to ensure no unwanted sperm would touch the carpels. Use a paintbrush to apply only the specific sperm to the carpels. Mendel's chosen phenotypes. Mendel chose to track 7 characteristics that varied in an either-or manner. There were 2 forms for each trait. These observable traits of an individual are known as phenotypes. So the phenotype is the observable trait. Notice with these phenotype examples, it's either one or the other. For instance, it's either green or it's yellow, or it's violet or it's white, or it's round or it's wrinkled. There is no in between. A typical experiment. In a typical experiment, Mendel started with 2 contrasting true breeding varieties. True breeding individuals will produce offspring that are identical to themselves when they self-pollinate or crossed to another member of the same population. So in the example on the right, we have yellow pea plants being crossed together, producing all yellow pea plants, and green pea plants crossing with each other, producing all green pea plants. Hybridization. Hybridization is when two true breeding parents with different traits are bred together, crossed. The true breeding parents are the pea generation. One parent has green-colored peas, and the other has yellow-colored peas. The hybrid offspring of the pea generation are the F1 generation. In this case, both offspring have yellow-colored peas. Hybridization. The two F1 individuals are self-pollinated, or bred with each other to produce the F2 generation. This would produce a surprising result. Monohybrid Cross. Mendel crossed a true breeding pea plant having purple flowers with a true breeding pea plant having white flowers. This is a monohybrid cross because the parent plants differ in only one trait, their flower color. The observation is that all F1 plants had purple flowers. Monohybrid Cross. Two F1 plants were crossed and produced 929 F2 plants. The observation is that 705 of the 929 plants had purple flowers, or roughly 75%, and 224 had white flowers, roughly 25%. Monohybrid Cross. Mendel concluded that the pea plants contained a heritable unit, later identified as a gene, for flower color that was passed from generation to generation. There were two versions, later identified as alleles, for the flower color gene. The white allele did not disappear in the purple F1 plants. Instead, the purple color allele was controlling the flower color gene in the F1 plants. The F1 plants carried two alleles for the flower color gene, one purple and one white. Is this a pattern of inheritance? Mendel observed these same patterns of inheritance for the 6 other study traits in pea plants. The F1 generation all had the same phenotype which came from one of the parents. In the F2 generation, 3/4 of the population had the same phenotype as the F1 generation, and 1/4 had the phenotype of the other parent in the pea generation. Inheritance. The experiments led to 4 principles. Mendel used words like heritable factors and elementin as the work done linking chromosomes to heredity was not done until after his death. We'll use the modern terminology for clarity. Alleles are alternative forms of genes that account for variations in inherited characteristics. For example, there are 2 different versions of the gene for flower color in pea plants, one for purple and one for white. Inheritance. All organisms have 2 alleles. For each characteristic, an organism inherits 2 alleles, one from each parent. The 2 alleles may be the same or they may be different. An organism that has 2 identical alleles for a gene is homozygous for that gene. An organism that has 2 different alleles for a gene is heterozygous for that gene. Inheritance. Dominant and recessive allele. If the 2 alleles of a pair are different, heterozygous, the one that determines the phenotype is the dominant allele. The other allele that has no noticeable effect on the phenotype is the recessive allele. Inheritance. Law of segregation. A gamete carries only one allele for each trait because the allele pairs separate, or segregate, from each other during meiosis. If a plant carries an allele for a tall pea plant and an allele for a short pea plant, which is heterozygous for height, its gametes will carry either the tall allele or the short allele, not both. When sperm and egg unite at fertilization, each contributes its one allele, so the offspring will have 2 alleles, one from each parent. Chromosome theory of inheritance. Chromosomes were first observed in the late 1800s, but it wasn't until about 1900 that biologists began to understand what their functions were. The research starting in the early 1900s led to the chromosome theory of inheritance. Chromosome theory of inheritance. In 1903, Walter Sutton and Theodore Boveri independently linked Mendel's rules with the details of meiosis to formulate the chromosome theory of inheritance. The theory states that meiosis causes the patterns of inheritance observed by Mendel in his pea plants, and hereditary factors called genes are located on chromosomes. Allele pairs. Remember from our study of mitosis and meiosis that each diploid cell has 2 sets of homologous chromosomes. It is on these homologous chromosomes that the allele pairs for each trait, Mendel's second hypothesis, are found.